Hi, I'm Nicole Harper. For 3 years, I watched my sister live like royalty while I worked myself to exhaustion keeping our family business afloat. Designer bags arrived weekly. Exotic vacations flooded her social media. A penthouse overlooking the waterfront that cost more than our parents made in 5 years. Everyone celebrated her success, her ambition, her glow-up. What they didn't know was that every swipe of her credit card, every luxury purchase, every glamorous dinner was funded by stolen identities, forged documents, and my name attached to debts I never signed for. One late-night phone call from a collections agency changed everything, and what I uncovered didn't just ruin her reputation. It put her behind bars. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that when the truth finally surfaced, it felt like the ground itself had been pulled from under you? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started on a Thursday evening in late September when my phone rang at 11:47 at night. I was halfway through reviewing quarterly reports for Harper & Co., the boutique consulting firm my parents had built from nothing 30 years ago. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, an 800 prefix that made my stomach tighten before I even answered. "This is Nicole Harper," I said, my voice careful. "Miss Harper, this is Leonard Grimes from Apex Financial Recovery. We've been attempting to reach you regarding an overdue balance of $63,000 on your Meridian Luxury account. Your payment is now 90 days past due, and we need to discuss immediate settlement options." I sat up straight, my pen clattering onto the desk. "I don't have an account with Meridian Luxury. You must have the wrong person." There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking in the background. "Ma'am, the account was opened in your name 18 months ago. We have your social security number, date of birth, and a Portland address on file. The purchases include high-end fashion items, jewelry, and electronic goods. Are you saying you didn't authorize this account?" My pulse was loud in my ears now. "No. I've never even been inside that store." "Then I'm afraid we're dealing with identity theft," he said quietly. "I'm going to transfer you to our fraud department, but Miss Harper, you'll need to file a police report immediately. This isn't a small matter." I hung up 20 minutes later with a case number, a sinking feeling in my chest, and a list of purchases I'd supposedly made. Gucci handbags. Cartier bracelets. Louis Vuitton luggage. A custom Rolex. None of it made sense until I opened my laptop and searched for the account details they'd sent via email. The billing address wasn't mine. It was Vanessa's penthouse on the south waterfront. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. My younger sister. The one who'd moved back to Portland 2 years ago claiming she'd landed a consulting gig with a tech startup. The one who posted Instagram stories from first-class flights and Michelin star restaurants. The one my parents constantly praised for finally getting her life together after years of what they politely called finding herself. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I pulled up every financial document I had access to. Bank statements. Credit reports. Tax returns. And there it was, buried in my credit report like a landmine I'd never noticed. 3 additional credit cards in my name. 2 personal loans. A car lease for a Mercedes I'd never driven. My credit score had dropped 140 points in the past year, and I'd been too busy managing the business to notice. The next morning, I called my bank. Then I called the credit bureaus. Then I sat in my car outside the Portland Metro precinct for 20 minutes before I could force myself to walk inside. The detective who took my statement was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a coffee-stained tie. His name was James Cordero, and he didn't look surprised when I explained what I'd found. "Identity theft between family members is more common than people think," he said, jotting notes on a yellow pad. "The tricky part is proving it wasn't authorized. Do you have any evidence she was the one who opened these accounts?" I pulled out my phone and showed him screenshots of Vanessa's Instagram. Photos of her wearing the exact jewelry listed on the Meridian Luxury statement. A selfie in front of the Mercedes with the same license plate number on my fraudulent lease. A tagged location at the Ashford Grand Hotel on the same weekend. A $5,000 charge appeared on one of the stolen credit cards. Detective Cordero leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. Miss Harper, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to get ugly. Family cases always do. Are you prepared for that? I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I was. She stole my identity. She destroyed my credit. She's been living off my name for over a year. I don't care how ugly it gets. He opened a case file that day. Fraud investigation, identity theft, forgery. It would take weeks, maybe months, but he assured me they'd follow every thread. I left the station feeling hollowed out, like someone had scooped everything soft and human out of me and left only the bones. That weekend, my parents hosted their usual Sunday brunch at the house on Hawthorne Boulevard. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to skip it entirely, to avoid seeing Vanessa's face across the table knowing what I now knew. But another part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to show up and keep the peace, forced me into my car and down the familiar tree-lined streets. The house smelled like cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee when I walked in. My mother was in the kitchen arranging pastries on a ceramic platter, her reading glasses perched on her nose. My father sat at the dining table reading the newspaper, the same ritual he performed every Sunday for as long as I could remember. And Vanessa, she was curled up on the couch in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my rent, scrolling through her phone with the kind of ease that made my jaw tighten. Nicole, you're late, my mother said without looking up. Vanessa's been here since 9 helping me prep. I set my bag down carefully and forced a smile. Traffic was bad. Vanessa glanced up, her lips curving into something that might have been warmth if I hadn't known better. Hey Nick. You look tired. Still burning the midnight oil at the office? Something like that, I said evenly. Brunch passed in a haze of small talk and forced laughter. My father asked about client accounts. My mother shared updates about the church fundraiser she was organizing. Vanessa dominated the conversation with stories about her latest trip to Napa Valley, complete with photos of wine tastings and sunset views over rolling vineyards. Everyone listened. Everyone smiled. And I sat there with a knot in my chest, wondering how long she'd been playing this game. After we ate, I excused myself to use the bathroom. But instead of heading upstairs, I slipped into my father's home office, the small room at the back of the house where he kept business files and old family records. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, just a nagging feeling that if Vanessa had stolen my identity, she hadn't stopped there. I opened the filing cabinet where my father kept tax documents and partnership papers. Everything seemed normal at first, organized by year in labeled folders. But then I found it. A manila envelope tucked behind the 2022 tax return, unsealed and slightly crumpled. Inside was a photocopy of my driver's license, my social security card, and a blank signature page with my name printed at the bottom. My hand started shaking. This wasn't just identity theft. This was premeditation. She'd planned this. She'd copied my documents, probably months before she opened the first fraudulent account, and she'd done it right here in our parents' house. I took photos of everything with my phone, then carefully placed the envelope back where I'd found it. When I returned to the living room, Vanessa was showing my mother a video on her phone, both of them laughing at something I couldn't hear. My father had dozed off in his recliner, the newspaper draped across his lap. The scene was so painfully normal, so deceptively peaceful, that for a moment I almost convinced myself I was wrong. That maybe there was an explanation. But then Vanessa looked up and met my eyes, and something flickered across her face. Not guilt exactly. More like calculation. Like she was trying to figure out what I knew. I left without saying goodbye. Back at my apartment in the Pearl District, I spread everything out on my kitchen table. Credit card statements. Loan documents. Screenshots. Photos of the forged signature page. And in the center of it all, I placed the one thing I'd been carrying with me since the day I found out about the fraud. My grandmother's compass necklace. She'd given it to me when I turned 16, a delicate silver chain with a working compass pendant that she said would always help me find my way home. Vanessa had asked to borrow it once, years ago, for a job interview. She said it would bring her luck. I'd said no, and she'd sulked for weeks. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Now I realized it was just another thing she wanted that belonged to me. Another piece of my life she thought she deserved more. I opened my laptop and started a new document. I titled it Case Summary and began typing. Every fraudulent charge. Every forged signature. Every lie she'd told our parents about where her money came from. I worked through the night, stopping only to make coffee and stretch my aching shoulders. By the time the sun rose over the Willamette River, I had 17 pages of evidence, meticulously organized and cross-referenced. Monday morning, I called Catherine Brennan, an attorney I'd met at a networking event 2 years prior. She specialized in white-collar crime and fraud cases, and when I explained the situation over the phone, she didn't hesitate. "Come in today," she said. "Bring everything you have." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her office was on Morrison Street, a sleek building with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that made me feel both out of place and strangely hopeful. Catherine was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense competence that immediately put me at ease. She reviewed my documents in silence, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When she finally looked up, her expression was serious. "Nicole, this is textbook identity theft and fraud. The evidence you've gathered is solid, but I need you to understand what happens next. If we pursue this criminally, your sister will likely face felony charges. Prison time is possible. Your family will be pulled into this. It's going to hurt." I swallowed hard. What if I just want her to stop? What if I just want to clear my name and move on? Catherine leaned forward, her hands folded on the desk. "That's a civil route. We can sue for damages, force her to repay the debts, maybe get a restraining order. But Nicole, if she's done this to you, she's probably done it to others. And if we don't stop her now, she'll do it again. The question you need to ask yourself is this. Do you want justice, or do you just want it to go away?" I thought about the compass necklace sitting in my purse. About my grandmother's voice telling me I'd always find my way. About the years I'd spent working myself to the bone while Vanessa coasted on stolen credit and lies. I met Catherine's eyes and felt something harden inside me. Something that had been soft and forgiving for too long. "I want justice," I said. She nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Then let's build a case she can't talk her way out of." The investigation started quietly, almost invisibly, like pulling a single thread from a tapestry to see what unravels. Catherine connected me with Stephen Whitmore, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracing fraudulent transactions. He had the kind of methodical mind that could look at a credit card statement and see patterns most people would miss. When we met at his office in downtown Portland, he was already wearing reading glasses and had 3 monitors open on his desk, each displaying different financial databases. "Tell me everything," he said, barely looking up from his screens. "Start from the first suspicious charge you noticed and walk me through it chronologically." I spent 2 hours recounting every detail. The late-night call from the collections agency. The shock of seeing Vanessa's address on the billing statement. The Instagram posts that matched the purchases down to the date and time. Stephen typed rapidly, occasionally pausing to pull up a bank record or cross-reference a transaction code. When I finished, he sat back and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Your sister is either incredibly bold or incredibly stupid," he said. "Probably both. She didn't even try to hide the spending patterns. Look at this." He turned one of his monitors toward me. "This is a timeline of purchases made on the fraudulent accounts in your name. Notice how they cluster around major holidays and events. A $12,000 handbag purchased the week before Christmas. A $9,000 jewelry charge right before your mother's birthday party." She was using your credit to fund gifts and appearances that made her look successful in front of your family. My stomach twisted. So she was performing. Creating this image of wealth to impress people. Exactly, Stephen said. And she got sloppy. See these charges here? He pointed to a series of transactions from late July. 4 separate purchases at Meridian Luxury within a 3-hour window, totaling $38,000. That's not normal shopping behavior. That's someone who knows they're about to hit a credit limit and is trying to maximize the damage before the account gets flagged. Can you prove she made those purchases? I asked. He smiled faintly. Already working on it. Every transaction leaves a digital footprint. Security camera footage from the stores, IP addresses from online purchases, geolocation data from her phone if she had it on her. Give me 2 weeks, and I'll have enough evidence to bury her. I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope mixed with a cold kind of determination. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about exposing a pattern of behavior that had probably been going on longer than I realized. That night, I started digging through old family photos and emails, looking for anything that might support what I was starting to suspect. That Vanessa's financial deception wasn't new. It was just the first time she'd been caught. I found an email thread from 4 years ago, back when Vanessa had been living in Seattle. My mother had forwarded it to me with a subject line that read, "Can you help your sister out?" The message was from Vanessa, a long rambling explanation about how she'd lost her apartment deposit due to a misunderstanding with her landlord and needed $3,000 to secure a new place. My mother had added a note at the bottom asking if I could loan her the money since I was more financially stable. I'd sent the money. I'd never been repaid. At the time, I'd written it off as helping family. Now I wondered how many other people she'd borrowed from and conveniently forgotten. The next morning, I called Rachel Donovan, my former college roommate who'd stayed close with Vanessa during the years I'd been focused on building my career. Rachel had moved to Eugene for work, but we still texted occasionally. When she answered, I could hear children laughing in the background. "Nicole, hey, it's been forever. What's going on?" "I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my voice steady. "About Vanessa. Did she ever borrow money from you?" There was a long pause. The background noise faded, like she'd moved to another room. "Yeah, she did. About 2 years ago. Said she needed help covering medical bills after a car accident. I lent her $5,000. She swore she'd pay me back within 6 months. Did she?" Another pause, longer this time. "No. Every time I brought it up, she'd change the subject or say she was going through a rough patch. Eventually I just stopped asking because it was making things awkward." "Why? Is she in trouble?" I told Rachel everything. The fraudulent accounts. The forged documents. The luxury purchases funded by stolen identities. When I finished, the silence on the other end was deafening. "Oh my God," Rachel finally whispered. "Nicole, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. She always seemed like she was doing well. Her social media made it look like she'd really turned things around." "That's the point," I said quietly. "She wanted everyone to think she was successful. She built an entire fake life, and she used other people's money to do it." Rachel promised to send me copies of the loan agreement she'd made Vanessa sign, along with text messages where Vanessa had promised repayment. It wasn't much, but it was another piece of the pattern. Another person she'd manipulated and abandoned when the debt came due. Over the next 2 weeks, Stephen worked his forensic magic while Catherine prepared the legal framework for both a criminal complaint and a civil lawsuit. Detective Cordero called twice with updates. They'd subpoenaed security footage from Meridian Luxury and found clear video of Vanessa making purchases with credit cards in my name. They'd also discovered that she'd used my identity to co-sign a lease on her penthouse, inflating her income on the application by listing herself as a partner at Harper & Co., a position she'd never held. Each new revelation felt like another betrayal stacked on top of the last. But the worst came when Detective Cordero called on a Wednesday afternoon with a tone in his voice I hadn't heard before. Nicole, we've expanded the investigation, he said carefully. Your sister's pattern of fraud extends beyond you. We've identified at least 3 other victims. One is a former boyfriend who discovered she'd taken out a car loan in his name. Another is a co-worker from her previous job who had credit cards opened using her information. The third is your father. My blood went cold. What? She opened a business line of credit using his social security number and forged his signature on the application documents. The credit line was for $75,000, and it's currently maxed out. The creditors have been sending notices to your parents' home address, but it looks like she's been intercepting the mail. Does he know? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Not yet. We wanted to confirm the details before we approached him. Nicole, I'm going to need you to be there when we tell him. This is going to devastate your family. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with all the lights off, staring out at the city skyline. Portland had always felt like home, but now it felt like a place where terrible things had been happening just beneath the surface while everyone went about their normal lives. I thought about my father, a man who'd spent his entire career building a business on integrity and trust. I thought about how Vanessa's fraud wouldn't just ruin her. It would shatter the family my parents had worked so hard to hold together. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old text messages from Vanessa. Casual conversations about weekend plans and family dinners. Complaints about work stress and dating struggles. She'd seemed so normal in those messages, so much like the sister I'd grown up with. But now I could see the manipulation woven through every conversation. The way she'd always asked how I was doing just before mentioning she needed something. The way she'd praised my success right before hinting that I should be more generous with family. My phone buzzed with a new message, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was from Catherine. Discovery documents ready for review. Can you come by the office tomorrow morning? We're moving forward with the criminal complaint. I typed back a quick confirmation and set the phone down. Tomorrow we'd officially begin the process that would likely send my sister to prison. Tomorrow I'd cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But tonight, I let myself grieve for the family we used to be before Vanessa's choices had poisoned everything. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical Pacific Northwest weather that matched my mood. I drove to Catherine's office in silence, my mind replaying every family memory I could recall, searching for signs I should have noticed earlier. When I arrived, Catherine had spread dozens of documents across her conference table, each one flagged with colored tabs. This is our case, she said, gesturing to the organized chaos. Financial records, witness statements, security footage stills, forensic analysis reports. Stephen found something particularly damning. She slid a printed spreadsheet toward me. These are the dates and times of the fraudulent purchases cross-referenced with your sister's phone location data. We obtained her cell phone records through a subpoena. She was physically present at every single location where purchases were made using your identity. I stared at the spreadsheet, watching Vanessa's movements tracked across Portland like a map of deception. Meridian Luxury on a Tuesday afternoon. Prestige Motors on a Thursday morning. The Ashford Grand Hotel on a Saturday night. Each location marked with a timestamp and a corresponding fraudulent charge. This doesn't leave room for doubt, Catherine continued. Combined with the forged signature documents found in your parents' home and the testimony from other victims, we have an overwhelming case. The district attorney's office has already indicated they're prepared to file charges. Identity theft, wire fraud, forgery, and theft by deception. Each count carries significant prison time. I felt numb looking at the evidence. Part of me had hoped there'd be some explanation, some possibility that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But the documentation was irrefutable. Vanessa had systematically stolen from me, from our father, from anyone she could exploit, all to maintain a lifestyle she hadn't earned. What happens now? I asked. Catherine organized the papers into neat stacks. Detective Cordero will execute an arrest warrant within the next 72 hours. Given the severity of the charges and the evidence we've compiled, bail will likely be set high. Your family will need to be notified before the arrest happens. That's standard procedure when there are multiple victims within the same household. I'm supposed to tell my parents that their daughter is about to be arrested for stealing from them? Catherine's expression softened slightly. Detective Cordero will handle the official notification. But yes, they'll need to know. And Nicole, you should prepare yourself. They might not react the way you hope. Sometimes families protect the person who hurt them rather than supporting the victim. Her words sat heavy in my chest because I knew she was right. My parents had always made excuses for Vanessa. When she dropped out of college, they'd called it finding her own path. When she'd bounced between jobs, they'd praised her for being adventurous. When she'd moved back to Portland broke and directionless, they'd welcomed her home without question. The pattern had been there all along. I'd just been too busy trying to be the responsible daughter to notice. That afternoon, Detective Cordero called to schedule a meeting at my parents' house for the following day. He wanted to present the evidence to them directly and prepare them for Vanessa's arrest. I agreed to be there, though the thought made my skin crawl. I spent the evening rehearsing what I might say, how I might explain that the daughter they'd celebrated and supported had betrayed them in the worst possible way. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept replaying moments from our childhood, searching for clues. Vanessa taking money from my piggy bank and claiming she'd borrowed it. Vanessa wearing my clothes without asking and insisting they looked better on her anyway. Vanessa crying to our parents when I confronted her about anything, turning herself into the victim so skillfully that I'd end up apologizing. The patterns had always been there. Small betrayals that seemed insignificant at the time but now formed a clear picture of someone who'd never respected boundaries or consequences. Friday morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through my apartment windows. I dressed carefully in clothes that felt like armor, professional slacks, and a button-down shirt that said I was serious and prepared. I drove to my parents' house on Hawthorne Boulevard with my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Detective Cordero was already there when I arrived, his unmarked car parked discreetly down the street. He met me at the door with a manila folder tucked under his arm and a grave expression that told me he'd done this kind of notification many times before. "Are they expecting me?" I asked quietly. "Your mother knows we're coming to discuss a family matter. She doesn't know the specifics yet." We walked to the front door together. My mother answered wearing her gardening apron, confusion evident on her face when she saw the detective beside me. "Patricia Harper," Detective Cordero said, showing his badge. "I spoke with you on the phone yesterday. Is your husband home? We need to discuss something important with both of you." My mother's confusion shifted to concern. She called for my father, who emerged from his office looking puzzled. They led us to the living room, the same space where we'd shared countless Sunday brunches and holiday gatherings. Now it felt like a courtroom. Detective Cordero didn't waste time with pleasantries. He opened the folder and began laying out documents on the coffee table. "Mr. and Mrs. Harper, I'm here to inform you that your daughter Vanessa is under investigation for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and forgery. The primary victim is your daughter Nicole, but our investigation has revealed that you, Mr. Harper, are also a victim." My father's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" The detective slid a document toward him. "This is an application for a business line of credit in the amount of $75,000. It was opened 18 months ago using your social security number and a forged signature. The account is currently maxed out, and the creditors have been attempting to contact you for the past 6 months regarding non-payment." My father picked up the document with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the page, stopping at the signature line. "That's not my signature," he said slowly. "I never applied for this." "We know," Detective Cordero said gently. "Your daughter Vanessa forged your signature and used your identity to obtain the credit line. She's also responsible for opening multiple fraudulent accounts in Nicole's name, resulting in over $90,000 in debt." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at me with wide eyes. "Nicole, is this true?" I nodded, my throat tight. I'd been working with Detective Cordero and my attorney for the past 3 weeks. Vanessa has been living off stolen credit and forged documents for over a year. Everything she has, the penthouse, the car, the designer clothes, it was all purchased with money she stole. There has to be some mistake, my mother said, her voice rising. Vanessa wouldn't do this. She's been doing so well. She got that consulting job, she's been helping with family dinners, she even talked about wanting to invest in the business. Mrs. Harper, Detective Cordero said firmly, we have security footage, phone records, and forensic accounting evidence that conclusively proves your daughter committed these crimes. She also defrauded at least 3 other individuals using the same methods. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a calculated pattern of criminal behavior. My father sat in stunned silence, still holding the forged credit application. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. Where is she now? We believe she's at her residence. We'll be executing an arrest warrant tomorrow morning. I wanted to notify you first as a courtesy, given that you're family members and victims. My mother started crying, quiet sobs that shook her shoulders. My father set the document down carefully and stood up, walking to the window with his back to all of us. The room felt suffocating, thick with grief and shock and the complete unraveling of the family narrative we'd all been living. I need to talk to her, my mother said through her tears. There has to be an explanation. Maybe someone else did this using her information. Maybe she's a victim too. Catherine had warned me this might happen. The instinct to protect, to find any explanation that didn't make their daughter a criminal. I opened my mouth to respond, but Detective Cordero spoke first. Mrs. Harper, I understand this is devastating news. But I need you to understand the severity of what's happening. Your daughter will be arrested and charged with multiple felonies. The evidence is overwhelming. The best thing you can do right now is prepare yourself and consider whether you want to retain an attorney on her behalf. My mother looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not quite blame, but something close to it. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Why did you go to the police without talking to us first? The question felt like a slap. Because she destroyed my credit, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Because she stole Dad's identity. Because she's been lying to all of us for over a year, and she wasn't going to stop unless someone made her stop. But she's your sister, my mother whispered. Family is supposed to protect each other. I felt something crack inside me, a fracture that had been forming for weeks. I tried to protect this family, I said quietly. I worked myself to exhaustion keeping the business running. I loaned Vanessa money when she asked. I showed up to every family dinner even when I was drowning in work. And while I was doing all of that, she was stealing from me. She was forging documents and maxing out credit cards in my name. So don't tell me about protecting family when I'm the only one who's been hurt here. The silence that followed was deafening. Detective Cordero gathered his documents and stood. I'll be in touch tomorrow after the arrest is executed. If you have questions or need resources for victims of financial fraud, my office can provide referrals. He left, and I stood to follow. My father finally turned from the window, his face aged by shock. Nicole, wait. I paused at the doorway but didn't turn around. I stopped at the threshold, my hand resting on the doorframe, but I didn't turn to face him. The weight of everything that had been said hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for far too long. Did you know about the credit line before today? My father asked, his voice rough with emotion. I shook my head slowly. Not until Detective Cordero told me. But I'm not surprised. Once I started digging, I realized Vanessa hadn't just targeted me. She'd been systematically exploiting anyone she had access to. My mother made a small wounded sound from the couch. I finally turned to look at them both, these two people who had raised me to believe in honesty and hard work, who now had to reconcile the fact that one of their daughters had become everything they'd taught us not to be. I know this is painful, I said, choosing my words carefully. But I need you both to understand something. I didn't want this. I didn't want to involve the police or press charges or watch our family fall apart. But Vanessa made choices that hurt people, and someone had to stop her before she destroyed more lives. She's still our daughter, my mother said, her voice breaking. "And I'm still yours too," I replied quietly. "But right now, it feels like you're more concerned about protecting her from consequences than you are about what she did to me. To Dad. To the other people she stole from." My father rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. "What do you want from us, Nicole? I want you to see what actually happened instead of making excuses for her. I want you to acknowledge that I didn't do this to hurt the family. I did it because it was the right thing to do." The conversation ended there because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse. I walked out of that house feeling like I'd lost something I could never get back, not just my relationship with Vanessa, but the comfortable illusion that family meant unconditional support. Sometimes family meant making impossible choices and living with the aftermath. I drove to Thornwood Cafe, a quiet place near my apartment where I could sit and process everything without being alone in my empty living room. I ordered black coffee I didn't really want and sat by the window watching people pass by on the sidewalk, all of them living normal Friday afternoons while my world continued to splinter. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Just heard from a mutual friend that something's happening with Vanessa. Are you okay?" I typed back a simple response. "We'll explain later. Thanks for checking in." The truth was I didn't know if I was okay. I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything soft and left only the rigid framework behind. But I also felt something else, a strange kind of clarity. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to manage everyone else's feelings or smooth over conflicts or make myself smaller so other people could be comfortable. I was simply standing in my truth, even though it was ugly and painful and tearing my family apart. Catherine called as I was finishing my coffee. Detective Cordero briefed me on the family meeting. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, I feel like I just set fire to my entire childhood." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a normal reaction. What you're doing takes extraordinary courage, Nicole. Most people in your position would rather absorb the damage than face their family with the truth." "Doesn't feel very courageous," I said. "Feels like I'm destroying everything." "You're not destroying it. It was already broken. You're just refusing to pretend it wasn't." Her words settled into me like stones dropping into still water. Maybe she was right. Maybe the family dysfunction had been there all along, hidden under layers of forced pleasantness and unspoken rules about what we were allowed to acknowledge. Vanessa's fraud hadn't created the problem. It had just finally exposed it. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since high school. I pulled out the box of old journals I kept in my closet, dusty notebooks filled with teenage angst and college stress and the occasional profound thought. I flipped through pages randomly, looking for anything that might help me make sense of how we'd gotten here. I found an entry from my sophomore year of college, written after a weekend visit home. Vanessa borrowed my car without asking and brought it back with an empty tank and a dent in the bumper. When I confronted her, she cried and said I was being selfish because she'd had an emergency. Mom made me apologize for upsetting her. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the only one who sees how she manipulates situations. I'd forgotten about that incident completely. But reading it now, I could see the pattern so clearly. Vanessa took what she wanted. When confronted, she played the victim. Our parents sided with her because her tears were always more dramatic than my quiet frustration. And I learned to stop confronting her because it was easier than being made to feel like the bad guy. I closed the journal and placed it back in the box. That version of me, the one who apologized for being upset about her car being damaged, felt like a different person. The current version of me was pressing criminal charges and refusing to back down even when my mother cried and my father looked at me like I'd betrayed the family. Growth was uncomfortable and lonely, but it was also necessary. Saturday morning arrived heavy with the knowledge of what was about to happen. Detective Cordero had said they'd execute the arrest warrant sometime before noon. I didn't know if I should stay home or go somewhere public or drive around aimlessly to distract myself. In the end, I stayed in my apartment and tried to focus on mundane tasks. Laundry. Dishes. Organizing my desk. Anything to keep my hands busy while my mind raced. At 10:43, my phone rang. "Catherine." It's done, she said without preamble. Vanessa was arrested at her penthouse about 20 minutes ago. She's being processed at the county jail now. The charges are official. 4 counts of identity theft, 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of forgery, and 1 count of theft by deception. I sat down on my couch, suddenly dizzy. How did she react? According to Detective Cordero, she denied everything at first. Said you were lying because you were jealous of her success. Then when they showed her the evidence, she tried to claim it was a misunderstanding. She's refusing to cooperate without an attorney present. Good, I said, though I wasn't sure what I meant by that. When will she be arraigned? Probably Monday morning. The prosecutor's office is requesting high bail given the severity of the charges and the multiple victims. Nicole, you should prepare yourself for what comes next. Vanessa will likely try to reach out to you or your parents. She'll want to negotiate, to make promises, to convince everyone this can be handled privately. I won't talk to her, I said firmly. And I'll make sure my parents know they shouldn't either. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. My sister was in jail. The words felt surreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. I thought about all the times we played together as children, building blanket forts and putting on performances for our parents. I thought about the Christmas when she was 7 and I was 10, and she'd saved up her allowance to buy me a book I'd been wanting. There had been good moments. Real moments. But those memories felt tainted now, overshadowed by years of manipulation and the ultimate betrayal of stealing my identity. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me open it. This is Vanessa. They took my phone, but I convinced them to let me send one message. Please don't do this. We can fix this as a family. I'll pay everything back. Just drop the charges. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to smooth things over and keep the peace, wanted to respond. Wanted to believe that maybe she really would pay it back, that maybe we could avoid the ugliness of a trial and prison time. But I thought about the forged signatures. The maxed-out credit cards. The other victims she'd defrauded. The systematic way she'd planned and executed her crimes. I deleted the message without responding and blocked the number. Sunday was worse than Saturday because my parents called. Not to check on me or ask how I was handling everything, but to tell me they were hiring an attorney for Vanessa and to ask if I would consider making a statement to the prosecutor about her good character. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice level, she stole $90,000 using my identity. She forged Dad's signature and maxed out a credit line in his name. What good character are you referring to? She's made mistakes, but she's still your sister. Family forgives. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing consequences. She committed felonies. Multiple felonies. Against her own family. You're being vindictive, my mother said, her voice sharp now. You always were jealous that Vanessa was more social, more charming. This is your way of punishing her for being different than you. The accusation stunned me into silence. After everything that had happened, after all the evidence, my mother was still finding ways to blame me and excuse Vanessa's behavior. I hung up without responding. Then I turned off my phone and spent the rest of the day in a kind of numb fog, moving through my apartment without really seeing anything. Monday morning brought the arraignment. Catherine had told me I didn't need to attend, but I wanted to be there. I needed to see Vanessa face the charges in an official capacity, to watch the legal system acknowledge that what she'd done was wrong and punishable. The Multnomah County Courthouse was busy with the usual Monday morning crowd of lawyers, defendants, and family members. I sat in the back of the courtroom wearing sunglasses even though we were indoors, trying to make myself invisible. Catherine sat a few rows ahead, ready to answer questions if the prosecutor needed additional information. When they brought Vanessa in, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. She wore a standard orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face bare of makeup. She looked younger somehow, smaller, like the years of cultivated sophistication had been stripped away to reveal something more vulnerable underneath. The judge read the charges in a flat, procedural voice. 4 counts of identity theft. 3 counts of wire fraud. 2 counts of forgery. 1 count of theft by deception. Each charge carried potential prison sentences that, when stacked together, could amount to decades behind bars. Vanessa's attorney, a man in an expensive suit my parents had clearly paid for, argued for reasonable bail. He painted a picture of a young woman with strong family ties and no prior criminal record who deserved a chance to prepare her defense from home rather than jail. The prosecutor, a stern woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, countered with the evidence. Multiple victims. Systematic fraud. Forged documents. A pattern of deception that showed calculation and intent. She recommended bail be set at $250,000. The judge considered for a moment, then ruled. Bail is set at $300,000. The defendant is remanded to custody until bail is posted. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. I watched Vanessa's face crumple. She turned to look at the gallery, her eyes scanning the rows until they found our parents sitting near the front. My mother was crying quietly. My father sat stone-faced, his hands clenched in his lap. Vanessa's eyes kept searching until they landed on me in the back row. Our gazes locked for just a moment. I couldn't read her expression. Anger maybe, or disbelief, or something like betrayal, which was almost funny given the circumstances. I didn't look away. I'd spent too much of my life backing down, making myself smaller, letting her take up all the space. Not anymore. The bailiff led her out through a side door, and just like that, the arraignment was over. People shuffled out of the courtroom, moving on to their next case or appointment. For them, this was just another Monday morning legal proceeding. For me, it was the moment my family officially shattered into pieces that might never fit back together. Catherine found me in the hallway. "How are you feeling?" "Strange," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel relieved or vindicated or something. But mostly I just feel sad." She nodded like she understood. "The hard part isn't over. Your parents will probably post bail. Vanessa will be out in a day or two, and then the real legal battle begins. Discovery, depositions, potentially a trial if she doesn't take a plea deal. This process can take months." "I'm not backing down," I said firmly. "I know you're not. That's why we're going to win." I left the courthouse and drove to my office at Harper & Co. for the first time in over a week. My assistant looked relieved to see me, gesturing to the stack of messages and files that had accumulated on my desk. Work had continued without me, as it always did, but there were decisions that needed my attention. I spent the afternoon buried in reports and client calls, grateful for the distraction of problems that had clear solutions. A marketing strategy that needed adjusting. A client relationship that required careful navigation. Budget projections for the next quarter. These were challenges I knew how to handle, unlike the tangled mess of family dysfunction and legal proceedings that had consumed my personal life. Around 4 in the afternoon, Stephen Whitmore called. "I wanted to give you a heads up. We found something else during the forensic audit." My stomach dropped. "What now?" "It looks like Vanessa was planning to escalate. We found draft applications for additional credit lines she hadn't submitted yet, including one that would have used your mother's identity. She also had documents suggesting she was researching how to establish a business entity using falsified information. If she hadn't been caught, this would have gotten much worse." I closed my eyes, processing this new information. So this wasn't the endgame. This was just the beginning of what she was capable of. "Exactly," Stephen confirmed. "The pattern suggests someone who was becoming more confident in their ability to defraud without consequences. The fact that you caught it when you did probably prevented significantly more damage." After the call ended, I sat in my office watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my desk. I thought about the version of events Vanessa would probably tell. That I'd overreacted. That she'd made some mistakes but was trying to fix things. That I'd been cruel to involve the police instead of handling it privately. She'd probably believe her own story, rewriting history to make herself the victim and me the vindictive sister who'd betrayed her. But I had something she didn't have. Documentation. Evidence. Testimony from multiple victims. A paper trail that told the truth even when people tried to lie. That evening, I returned to my apartment and did something I'd been avoiding. I went through Vanessa's social media profiles, looking at the curated life she'd presented to the world. Photos of expensive brunches with friends. Selfies in designer outfits. Inspirational quotes about success and manifestation and becoming your best self. The comments were filled with praise and envy. Living your best life. You're so inspiring. Goals. None of those people knew the truth. They saw the performance and believed it was real. How many other areas of my life had I been believing performances instead of investigating reality? I thought about my parents, still trying to protect Vanessa despite overwhelming evidence of her crimes. I thought about Rachel and the $5,000 she'd never gotten back. I thought about the other victims Detective Cordero had mentioned, people whose names I didn't even know but who'd been hurt by my sister's choices. This wasn't just about me anymore. It had never been just about me. Vanessa had woven a web of deception that had trapped multiple people, and someone had to be willing to shine a light on it even when doing so felt like setting fire to everything familiar. My phone rang. Catherine again. Your parents posted bail. Vanessa was released about an hour ago with conditions. She has to surrender her passport, can't leave the state, and is prohibited from contacting you or any of the other victims directly. Where will she stay? I asked. With your parents, most likely. Nicole, I need you to be extra careful over the next few weeks. People facing serious charges sometimes make desperate decisions. Make sure your doors are locked. Vary your routine. If she tries to contact you despite the protective order, document it immediately and call the police. The idea that I needed to protect myself from my own sister would have seemed absurd a month ago. Now it felt like a necessary precaution. I thanked Catherine and hung up, then went through my apartment checking locks and windows like I was preparing for a siege. That night, sleep came in fragments. I kept waking up to phantom sounds, my mind conjuring threats that probably weren't there. But in the quiet darkness of 3 a.m, I found myself thinking about my grandmother's compass necklace, still sitting in my jewelry box. She'd told me it would always help me find my way home. I got out of bed and retrieved the necklace, holding it in my palm and watching the tiny needle wobble and settle. North. South. East. West. Clear directions in an increasingly complicated world. Maybe that was what I needed to remember. That some truths were simple and directional even when everything else felt chaotic. What Vanessa had done was wrong. Reporting it was right. The consequences were painful but necessary. I fastened the necklace around my neck and felt something settle inside me. Not peace exactly, but resolution. I'd chosen my direction, and now I had to keep walking it even when the path got steep and the preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the arraignment, but the real battle started much sooner. 2 days after Vanessa was released on bail, my office received a certified letter from her attorney requesting a meeting to discuss potential restitution and case dismissal. Catherine forwarded it to me with a terse note attached. Standard intimidation tactic. They're hoping you'll fold before discovery. Don't respond directly. I didn't plan to. But what I hadn't anticipated was Vanessa showing up at Harper & Co. during business hours, walking past the reception desk like she still had every right to be there, and knocking on my office door before anyone could stop her. I looked up from my computer to find her standing in my doorway, dressed in understated clothes that screamed Reformation narrative. Simple jeans, a cream sweater, minimal jewelry. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup subtle. She looked like someone auditioning for the role of remorseful defendant. You can't be here, I said immediately, reaching for my phone. There's a protective order. I'm not trying to intimidate you, she said quickly, holding up both hands. I just need 5 minutes. Please. Nobody else will listen to me. My assistant appeared behind her, looking flustered. "I'm sorry, Nicole." She walked right past me. "I can call security." I considered it for a long moment, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to have her physically removed, to enforce the boundaries that the court had established. But another part, the part that had known her since we were children, wanted to hear what possible explanation she thought could justify what she'd done. 5 minutes, I said to my assistant. Then I want her escorted out. And stay within earshot. My assistant nodded and retreated to her desk just outside my office, leaving the door pointedly open. Vanessa stepped inside but didn't sit down. She stood near the bookshelf, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater like a nervous teenager. "I don't know where to start," she said finally. "How about with the truth for once?" She flinched at that. "Fair enough. Nicole, I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you and Dad and other people. But it wasn't supposed to go this far. It started small, just one credit card to help me get through a rough month, and then it spiraled. You opened accounts in my name for over a year," I said flatly. "You forged Dad's signature. You stole from Rachel. That's not spiraling. That's systematic fraud." "I was desperate," she said, her voice rising slightly. "After my divorce, I had nothing. No savings, no credit, no prospects. I was supposed to be the successful one, the one who made something of herself, and instead I was broke and humiliated. When I moved back to Portland, everyone was watching to see if I'd fail again. So you decided to steal your way to success." "I decided to survive," she shot back. "You have no idea what it's like to feel worthless. You've always been the golden child. The responsible one who does everything right. Mom and Dad actually respect you. They see you as competent. Me? I'm just the screw-up they tolerate." Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment I saw genuine pain in her expression. But pain didn't excuse what she'd done. Plenty of people struggled financially without committing felonies. "You could have asked for help," I said quietly. "You could have been honest about your situation instead of building a fake life funded by other people's ruined credit. And admit I was failing. Watch you and Mom and Dad exchange those looks, the ones that say I told you so." She shook her head. "I couldn't do that. So I found another way. You found a criminal way. And now you're facing serious prison time because you were too proud to ask for help." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, and I braced myself for the manipulation I'd seen so many times before. But when she spoke, her voice was different. Quieter. Almost defeated. "I know I can't fix this. I know you hate me. But I came here to tell you that I'm going to take a plea deal. My attorney thinks we can negotiate it down to 3 to 5 years if I show remorse and agree to full restitution." I processed this information carefully. A plea deal meant no trial. It meant she was accepting responsibility, at least legally. But it also meant she'd likely serve reduced time compared to what she'd get if convicted on all counts. "What about the restitution?" I asked. "How do you plan to pay back $90,000 plus what you stole from Dad and the others?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "I'll have to work, save, probably be on a payment plan for the rest of my life. But at least I wouldn't be fighting this in court for the next year. At least it would be over." "It's not over for me," I said sharply. "My credit is destroyed. I've spent thousands on attorneys and forensic accountants. I've had to explain to clients why my name appeared in arrest reports even though I'm the victim. You taking a plea deal doesn't undo any of that." "I know," she whispered. "And I'm sorry. I know sorry doesn't mean anything right now, but I am." I looked at her standing there in my office, this person I'd shared a childhood with, who knew all my embarrassing middle school stories, who'd been my bridesmaid when I got married years ago before that relationship fell apart. Somewhere underneath all the fraud and manipulation was the sister who used to make me laugh, who defended me when I got bullied in 4th grade, who'd helped me sneak out to a concert when we were teenagers. But that person either didn't exist anymore or had never really existed in the first place. Maybe the version of Vanessa I'd loved was just another performance, as carefully curated as her Instagram feed. "Your 5 minutes are up," I said, my voice steady. "Please leave. Nicole, please. If you could just talk to the prosecutor, tell them I'm cooperating, maybe they'd be more lenient with the plea terms." "I'm not doing that," I said firmly. "You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences without me running interference for you." Something shifted in her expression then. The vulnerability hardened into something colder. "You've always been jealous of me," she said, her tone changing. "You could never stand that people liked me better, that I was more fun, more interesting. This is your revenge." I stood up, my patience finally exhausted. "Get out. Now. You're going to regret this," she said, backing toward the door. "When Mom and Dad see what you've become, how vindictive and cruel, they'll realize they backed the wrong daughter." My assistant appeared in the doorway with a security guard. Vanessa shot me one last look, something between fury and desperation, then turned and walked out with as much dignity as she could muster. I waited until I heard the elevator doors close before I allowed myself to sit back down, my hands shaking slightly. "Catherine called within 10 minutes. I heard Vanessa violated the protective order by showing up at your office. We need to document this immediately. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. She wanted me to help negotiate her plea deal. To tell the prosecutor she's cooperating. Absolutely not. Catherine's voice was sharp. That's witness tampering. She knows better, and so does her attorney. I'm filing a motion to have her bail revoked based on this violation. Will that actually work? Maybe not, but it sends a message that we're not going to tolerate intimidation tactics. "Nicole, I need you to write down everything she said, word for word if you can remember. This could be useful later." I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting the conversation, trying to recall every detail. When I finished, I had 3 pages of notes that painted a picture of someone who was sorry she'd been caught but not necessarily sorry for what she'd done. The jealousy accusation particularly stuck with me. It was such a common tactic, reframing the victim's pursuit of justice as vindictiveness, making accountability look like cruelty. That evening, I met Rachel for dinner at a quiet restaurant in the Pearl District. She'd driven up from Eugene specifically to check on me, and I was grateful for the company of someone who understood what I was dealing with. "How are your parents handling everything?" she asked after we'd ordered. I took a sip of water, considering how to answer. "They posted her bail. They're paying for her attorney. My mom asked me to make a statement about Vanessa's good character." Rachel's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Completely. In their minds, I'm the one tearing the family apart. Vanessa is just a victim of circumstances who made some mistakes." "That's insane," Rachel said flatly. "She committed felonies. Against you. Against your dad. I know. But acknowledging that would mean admitting they enabled her behavior for years. It's easier to blame me for pressing charges than to examine their own role in how she turned out." We ate in relative silence for a while, both processing the complicated dynamics of family dysfunction. Finally, Rachel spoke again. "I need to tell you something. After you told me about the fraud, I started asking around. Talking to other people who'd known Vanessa over the years. Nicole, you're not the only one she did this to. I know. The police found other victims." "No, I mean beyond what the police know." Rachel pulled out her phone and showed me a private message thread. "There are at least 4 other people who lent her money that was never repaid. Small amounts, 1,000 here, 1,500 there. Not enough to report to police, but enough to hurt. And there's a woman named Melissa who says Vanessa used her apartment as a shipping address for credit cards she was opening fraudulently. Melissa only found out when a collections agency showed up at her door." My stomach turned. "How many people has she hurt?" "More than we probably know." Rachel put her phone away. "The thing is, everyone felt too embarrassed to report it. They thought they were the only ones, or they blamed themselves for trusting her. It wasn't until I started connecting dots that people began sharing their stories. This information felt important, like another piece of evidence in the larger pattern of Vanessa's behavior. I made a note to tell Catherine and Detective Cordero. Each additional victim strengthened the case that this wasn't just a desperate woman making mistakes. This was someone who'd built an entire lifestyle on exploiting the people around her. The following week brought the preliminary hearing, a procedural step where the judge would determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. Catherine had warned me it would be brief and mostly technical, but I attended anyway. I needed to see each step of the legal process, to witness the machinery of justice working even when it felt impossibly slow. The courtroom was less crowded than during the arraignment. My parents sat on Vanessa's side, both looking worn and older than I remembered. They didn't acknowledge me when I entered. I took a seat on the opposite side of the aisle, a physical representation of the divide that had opened up between us. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically. Forged documents. Security footage. Bank records. Expert testimony from Stephen Whitmore about the pattern and sophistication of the fraud. Vanessa's attorney tried to poke holes in the timeline, suggesting that maybe some of the charges were based on misunderstandings, but the evidence was too solid. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and no patience for legal theatrics, reviewed everything carefully. After about 90 minutes, she made her ruling. The evidence is sufficient to bind the defendant over for trial on all counts. The defendant will remain released on bail with the existing conditions. Trial date is set for 8 weeks from today unless a plea agreement is reached. Vanessa's shoulders sagged slightly. Her attorney whispered something to her, probably about plea negotiations. My parents looked at each other with expressions I couldn't quite read. Resignation maybe, or grief, or both. Outside the courthouse, Catherine briefed me on what to expect next. The prosecutor's office will likely reach out to Vanessa's attorney with a formal plea offer. Based on the strength of our evidence, I'd expect them to offer somewhere between 4 and 7 years, with restitution as a condition of parole. And if she doesn't take it? Then we go to trial, and she risks getting the maximum sentence on all counts. That could be 15 to 20 years. Her attorney would be foolish to let that happen, but some defendants refuse to accept reality until they're facing a jury. I nodded, processing this timeline. 4 to 7 years. Vanessa would be in her late 30s or early 40s when she was released. Those would be years she couldn't get back. Years away from family and freedom and the life she'd been trying so desperately to fake. Did I feel sorry for her? Maybe a little. But mostly I felt tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the emotional labor, tired of being cast as the villain in a story where I was clearly the victim. That afternoon, I returned to work and tried to focus on actual business matters. We had a major client presentation coming up, and I'd been neglecting preparation while dealing with the legal case. My team had picked up the slack, but there were decisions that required my input. I threw myself into the work, grateful for problems that had concrete solutions and outcomes I could control. Around 5, my assistant buzzed my intercom. "Nicole, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your mother." I closed my eyes briefly, steeling myself. "Send her in." My mother entered looking smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of recent events. She wore a cardigan I recognized from years ago, a favorite piece she usually saved for comfortable days at home. She didn't sit down, just stood near my desk with her purse clutched in front of her like a shield. "I won't take much of your time," she said quietly. "I know you're busy." I waited, saying nothing. "Your father and I have been talking. About everything that's happened. About Vanessa and the charges and how we've handled things." I kept my expression neutral, not willing to make this easier for her. "We realize we haven't been fair to you," she continued, the words coming slowly like they hurt to say. "We've been so focused on protecting Vanessa that we didn't stop to think about what she did to you. To your father. To all those other people." "Okay," I said simply. She looked up at me then, and I saw tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to fix this, Nicole. I don't know how to be angry at one daughter while still loving her. I don't know how to support you without feeling like I'm abandoning her. This whole situation is impossible. It's not impossible, I said gently. It's just uncomfortable. Vanessa committed crimes. She hurt people. The fact that she's your daughter doesn't change that reality. You can love her and still hold her accountable. But you're pressing charges. You're sending your own sister to prison. I'm not sending her to prison, I corrected. Her choices did that. I'm just refusing to be her victim silently. My mother wiped her eyes with a tissue she'd pulled from her purse. Your father wants to know if you'd be willing to have dinner with us. Just the three of us. To talk about how we move forward as a family. I considered the offer carefully. Part of me wanted to say no, to maintain the protective distance I'd established. But another part missed my parents, missed the relationship we'd had before everything fell apart. I'll think about it, I said finally. But Mom, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to apologize for reporting the fraud. I'm not going to feel guilty for protecting myself. If we're going to rebuild any kind of relationship, it has to be based on you accepting that what I did was necessary. She nodded slowly. I understand. Or at least, I'm trying to. After she left, I sat in my office watching the sky turn purple with approaching dusk. The city lights began flickering on across Portland, thousands of lives being lived in parallel, each person dealing with their own complicated relationships and impossible choices. I wasn't unique in my struggle. Families fractured every day over money, betrayal, competing loyalties. But knowing that didn't make it feel less lonely. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Plea negotiations have begun. Prosecutor offered 6 years with possibility of parole after 4 if she completes a financial fraud rehabilitation program. Vanessa's attorney is countering with 3 years. Expect this to take a few weeks to resolve. 6 years. 4 years minimum. I tried to imagine what that would look like. Vanessa in prison while I rebuilt my credit and my life. Family holidays with an empty chair and unspoken tension. Explanations to extended family members and old friends about what had happened. Years of complicated feelings that probably wouldn't resolve themselves neatly. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding. I wrote a victim impact statement, a document that would be presented to the judge if and when Vanessa was sentenced. Catherine had asked me to prepare it weeks ago, but I hadn't been ready. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, I tried to find words that captured what the past months had been like. Your Honor, I typed. My sister's crimes didn't just affect my credit score or my bank account. They affected my ability to trust, my relationship with my family, and my sense of safety in the world. When someone you love betrays you systematically and deliberately, it changes something fundamental about how you see relationships. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from that. I continued writing, trying to be honest without being melodramatic, factual without being cold. When I finished, I had 2 pages that felt true. Not angry, not vengeful, just truthful about the cost of Vanessa's choices. The weeks that followed moved with a strange rhythm, slow in some ways and impossibly fast in others. I fell into a routine that felt almost normal on the surface. Work during the day, evening walks along the waterfront to clear my head, phone calls with Catherine to discuss legal developments. But underneath the normalcy was a constant hum of tension, waiting for the next shoe to drop. It came on a Wednesday morning. Catherine called while I was reviewing budget projections at my desk. Vanessa accepted the plea deal. 6 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 4. Sentencing is scheduled for next Friday at 10 in the morning. The judge will hear victim impact statements at that time. I set down my pen carefully. So it's really over. No trial. The criminal case is essentially over, yes. But Nicole, there's still the civil component. We need to pursue restitution for the financial damages. That will be a separate process that could take years depending on her ability to pay from prison. I understand, I said, though part of me just wanted to be done with all of it. What happens at sentencing? You'll have the opportunity to read your impact statement directly to the judge and to Vanessa. Other victims can speak as well. Then the judge will impose the sentence. Vanessa will likely be taken into custody immediately and transported to the processing facility. My parents will be there, I said quietly. Probably. Catherine's voice was gentle. Are you prepared for that? I don't know. But I'll be there anyway. The days leading up to sentencing felt surreal. I kept expecting to feel triumphant or vindicated, but mostly I just felt heavy. This was my sister we were talking about, the person who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who'd held my hand during our grandmother's funeral, who knew all my childhood secrets. Somewhere along the way, that person had either disappeared or had never really existed. Both possibilities hurt. I had dinner with my parents on Tuesday evening, our first real conversation since everything had started. We met at a quiet restaurant near their house, neutral territory where we could attempt civility. My father looked like he'd aged a decade in the past few months. My mother's hands shook slightly when she picked up her water glass. How are you doing? My father asked after we'd ordered, his voice careful. I'm managing, I said. Work has been busy. That helps. We saw the plea deal, my mother said. 6 years feels like such a long time. It's actually less than she could have gotten if this had gone to trial, I replied evenly. The prosecutor was willing to negotiate because she agreed to cooperate fully and accept responsibility. My father nodded slowly. Her attorney explained that to us. Nicole, we need you to know that we understand now. What she did. How serious it was. We've spent weeks going through financial records, seeing the full extent of it. The credit line she opened in my name, the accounts in yours, the other people she hurt. We should have believed you from the beginning. His words settled into me with a weight I hadn't expected. I'd been so prepared for them to keep defending Vanessa that hearing actual accountability caught me off guard. Thank you for saying that, I managed. We know we can't undo the past few months, my mother added. The way we made you feel like you were the problem. But we want to try to rebuild. If you're willing. I looked at both of them, these people who'd raised me, who'd loved me imperfectly but genuinely. They'd made mistakes. They'd chosen wrong in crucial moments. But they were trying now, and maybe that had to be enough. I'm willing to try, I said. But it's going to take time. Trust doesn't repair quickly. We understand, my father said. We'll wait as long as it takes. The rest of the dinner passed with lighter conversation. Stories about work, updates about extended family members, safe topics that didn't require us to navigate the minefield of recent events. When we parted ways in the parking lot, my mother hugged me tightly, and I let myself lean into it for just a moment. Friday arrived with gray skies and steady rain, typical Oregon weather that matched the solemnity of the day. I dressed carefully in a navy suit, professional and serious. Catherine met me outside the courthouse, carrying her briefcase and an umbrella. Are you ready? She asked. As ready as I'll ever be. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected. My parents sat in the front row on the right side. Rachel had driven up from Eugene to support me, sitting beside me on the left. Detective Cordero was there, along with Stephen Whitmore. A few other people I didn't recognize filled the remaining seats, probably other victims or their representatives. When they brought Vanessa in, she looked different again. Not the polished version from her Instagram, not the desperate woman who'd shown up at my office, but something harder. Her hair was pulled back severely. She wore a simple gray dress that looked borrowed. Her face was pale, eyes hollow. She glanced at the gallery briefly, her gaze skimming over me without really landing, then turned to face the judge. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every variety of human failing during her decades on the bench. We're here for sentencing in the matter of the state versus Vanessa Marie Harper, the judge began. The defendant has entered guilty pleas to 4 counts of identity theft, 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of forgery, and 1 count of theft by deception. Before I impose sentence, I'll hear from the victims. Ms. Harper, you have the right to be present but not the right to respond during victim statements. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Vanessa said quietly. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we have 4 victims who wish to make statements. I'll call them in order. The first was a man named David Chin, the ex-boyfriend Detective Cordero had mentioned. He described discovering that Vanessa had opened a car loan in his name, tanking his credit just as he was trying to buy his first house. His voice shook with anger as he spoke, and I felt his pain echoing my own experience. The second was Melissa Torres, the woman Rachel had told me about. She explained how Vanessa had used her address for fraudulent accounts, leading to harassment from collection agencies and damage to her rental history. She'd had to hire an attorney just to prove she wasn't involved in the fraud. Rachel went third, talking about the $5,000 loan that had never been repaid and the friendship that had been built on lies. She kept her statement brief but pointed, and I was grateful she'd made the drive to speak. Then it was my turn. I stood, my victim impact statement folded in my hand, and walked to the podium facing the judge. I could feel Vanessa's presence to my right but didn't look at her. Not yet. Your Honor, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. My sister's crimes cost me over $90,000 in fraudulent debt. They destroyed my credit score, affecting my ability to secure loans or make major purchases. But the financial damage, as significant as it is, isn't the worst part. The worst part is learning that someone you trusted completely, someone you shared a childhood with, was capable of systematically stealing your identity and building a fake life with it. The worst part is sitting across from your parents at Sunday brunch while your sister talked about her success, knowing that every dollar funding that success was stolen from you. The worst part is realizing that the person you thought you knew was either gone or had never really existed in the first place. I paused, glancing down at my prepared statement, then decided to speak from the heart instead. I don't know what Vanessa's life will look like after she serves her sentence. I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship again, or if our family will ever feel whole. What I do know is that pressing charges, standing up for myself, refusing to be a silent victim, that was the hardest and most necessary thing I've ever done. And I'd do it again, despite the cost, because some things are more important than keeping the peace. Truth matters. Accountability matters. And people who hurt others need to face consequences, even when it's painful for everyone involved. I folded the paper and returned to my seat. My hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up. Rachel squeezed my arm gently. The judge made some notes, then looked up. Does the defendant wish to make a statement before sentencing? Vanessa's attorney whispered something to her. She nodded and stood, moving to the same podium I'd just left. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Your Honor, I want to say that I take full responsibility for what I did. I hurt people I cared about. I made choices that were selfish and wrong. I can't undo the damage, but I want everyone to know that I'm sorry. Especially Nicole. She didn't deserve any of this. She sat back down quickly, and I noticed she still hadn't looked directly at me or our parents. The apology felt hollow, scripted by her attorney to sound remorseful for the judge. Maybe that was unfair. Maybe she really was sorry. But years of manipulation had made it impossible for me to trust her words. Judge Morrison reviewed the documents in front of her, taking her time. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority. Ms. Harper, I've reviewed the pre-sentencing report, the victim statements, and the facts of this case. What strikes me most is the calculated nature of your crimes. This wasn't a single desperate act. This was a pattern of deliberate deception spanning more than a year, targeting multiple victims including members of your own family. You used their trust as a weapon against them. The harm you've caused extends beyond financial damage to the fundamental fabric of these relationships. The judge paused, letting her words sink in. The court accepts the negotiated plea agreement. You are hereby sentenced to 6 years in the Oregon Department of Corrections with eligibility for parole after 4 years served. As conditions of your eventual parole, you will be required to make full restitution to all victims, complete a financial fraud rehabilitation program, and maintain steady employment. You are also prohibited from opening any credit accounts or applying for loans without prior approval from your parole officer for a period of 10 years following your release. Vanessa's shoulders dropped slightly. The reality of 6 years was settling in, the abstract concept becoming concrete consequence. Do you have anything else to say before you're remanded to custody? The judge asked. Vanessa shook her head, and I saw tears sliding down her cheeks now. Silent, probably genuine. The bailiff approached with handcuffs. That was when Vanessa finally turned and looked at our parents. My mother was crying openly, my father's arm around her shoulders. They both looked shattered. Vanessa mouthed something I couldn't hear, maybe I'm sorry or I love you, and then the bailiff was leading her toward the side door that would take her away from this courtroom, this life, this family. Just before she disappeared through the door, Vanessa looked back one more time. Her eyes found mine across the courtroom. We held that gaze for just a second, and I saw everything in it. Regret, anger, sadness, loss. All the complicated feelings that come with destroying your own life and hurting the people who loved you. Then she was gone. The courtroom slowly emptied. My parents left without speaking to anyone, moving like people in shock. Other victims filed out with their attorneys or support people. Catherine gathered her documents efficiently, giving me space to process. How do you feel? Rachel asked quietly. I thought about the question carefully. Sad, mostly. Relieved that it's over. Guilty for feeling relieved. All of it at once. That seems appropriate, she said. This isn't the kind of thing that has clean emotions attached. Outside, the rain had stopped. Pale sunlight broke through the clouds, creating that particular Oregon light that made everything look simultaneously washed clean and impossibly fragile. Catherine walked with me to my car, making sure I was okay to drive. The civil restitution process will take time, she reminded me. Vanessa won't be earning much in prison, so the payments will be minimal until she's released. But we'll make sure it's structured legally so she can't avoid it. I nodded, understanding that the practical aftermath would stretch for years. But the criminal case was closed. Vanessa would serve her time. Justice, in its imperfect way, had been done. I spent the rest of that day alone, driving to places that had meant something to my family. The park where we'd had birthday parties as kids. The ice cream shop where my father used to take us on summer evenings. The overlook above the city where my mother had brought us to watch fireworks. All these memories felt different now, tinged with the knowledge of how the story had turned out. But they weren't erased. That was what I was slowly learning. Vanessa's betrayal didn't delete the good parts of our childhood. It just complicated them, added layers of understanding about who we'd each become and why. The following weeks brought a strange sort of peace. The constant anxiety of legal proceedings lifted. My sleep improved. I could focus on work without the distraction of court dates and evidence gathering. Slowly, my life began to feel like my own again instead of something being held hostage by my sister's choices. Catherine helped me begin the process of repairing my credit, disputing the fraudulent accounts, and working with creditors to remove the damage from my records. It would take time, but the path forward was clear. My parents and I started having regular dinners again, carefully rebuilding trust through consistency and honesty. We didn't talk about Vanessa much. The wound was too fresh, and none of us knew how to navigate it yet. One evening about a month after sentencing, I was organizing my apartment when I came across the box of childhood journals again. I pulled out the one from high school and flipped to a random entry. It was from my junior year, written after Vanessa had borrowed my favorite sweater without asking and returned it stained and stretched. Sometimes I think Vanessa believes that what's mine is automatically hers too, I'd written. Like she doesn't see me as a separate person with my own things and boundaries. I tried to talk to her about it, but she just laughed and said I was being uptight. Maybe I am. Maybe that's just what sisters do. I closed the journal slowly, struck by how clearly I'd seen the pattern even then. The boundary violations had always been there. I'd just been taught to accept them as normal sibling dynamics instead of recognizing them as warning signs of something more troubling. But I was learning now. Learning that healthy relationships require mutual respect. Learning that family doesn't mean tolerating abuse. Learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold someone accountable even when it tears everything apart. I took out my grandmother's compass necklace, the one I'd been wearing throughout this entire ordeal. The tiny needle still pointed north with reassuring certainty. She'd told me it would help me find my way home, and in a sense, it had. Not home to a perfect family or a simple resolution, but home to myself. To the person who could stand in her truth even when it cost her dearly. That night, I wrote a letter I had no intention of sending. Not to Vanessa, but to myself. A record of everything I'd learned and everything I wanted to remember going forward. Dear Nicole, I wrote. You survived something you never thought you'd have to face. You made impossible choices and lived with difficult consequences. You lost things that mattered, including relationships you thought were permanent. But you also gained something crucial, the knowledge that you can trust yourself. That your instincts are valid. That your pain deserves acknowledgement. That standing up for yourself isn't vindictive, it's necessary. Remember this when things get hard again, because they will. Remember that you chose truth over comfort, and that choice mattered. I folded the letter and placed it inside my grandmother's old jewelry box, next to the compass necklace. Someday, maybe years from now, I'd find it again and be reminded of this chapter in my life. The time when my sister's fraud destroyed our family and I had to decide whether to stay silent or speak up. I chose to speak up. And while the cost was enormous, greater than I could have imagined when I first answered that late-night call from the collections agency, I'd make the same choice again. Because some things are worth fighting for. Integrity. Truth. Self-respect. The right to exist without being exploited by people who claim to love you. Vanessa would serve her 6 years. She'd eventually be released, hopefully changed by the experience but possibly not. We might never reconcile. Our parents might always carry grief about how our family fractured. The story didn't have a neat, happy ending tied up with a bow. But it had something more valuable. It had honesty. And sometimes honesty is the only real foundation for whatever comes next. Months turned into a year. I continued therapy to process the betrayal and family trauma. My credit score slowly recovered. The business thrived. I even started dating again, carefully opening myself up to trust after spending so long learning how it could be broken. My parents visited Vanessa in prison a few times. They'd ask if I wanted to come, and I'd politely decline. Maybe someday I'd be ready for that conversation, but not yet. The wound was still too fresh, and I'd learned that healing doesn't follow a timeline that conveniences other people. Rachel and I stayed close, bonding over our shared experience of being deceived by someone we'd cared about. The other victims occasionally reached out through Catherine, forming a kind of informal support network. We'd all been targeted by the same person and had all made the difficult choice to pursue justice rather than let it slide. On the anniversary of Vanessa's sentencing, I drove out to the overlook where my family used to watch fireworks. The city sprawled below, thousands of lights representing thousands of lives and stories. Somewhere in that landscape was a prison where my sister was serving time for her crimes. Somewhere else were the other people she'd hurt, rebuilding their lives and credit and trust. And here I was, standing on a hill with a compass around my neck, having survived something I never expected to face. I wasn't the same person I'd been a year ago. That version of me had been softer, more willing to accept discomfort to keep the peace. This version knew better. Knew that peace built on silence isn't really peace at all. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder. I did this sometimes now, leaving messages for myself to listen to on hard days. This is what I want you to remember, I said to the recording. You did the right thing even when it hurt. You chose yourself when everyone else wanted you to sacrifice your well-being for the comfort of the family. You stood firm when it would have been easier to fold. And you survived. You're still here, still standing, still moving forward. That's not nothing. That's everything. I saved the recording and put my phone away. The sun was setting over Portland, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Beautiful and temporary, like most things worth seeing. Tomorrow I'd go back to work, continue building the life I'd fought so hard to protect. I'd call my parents and make plans for Sunday dinner. I'd respond to emails and review budgets and handle the ordinary tasks of existence. But tonight, I'd stand here and acknowledge everything that had happened, everything that had changed, and everything I'd learned about myself in the process. Vanessa's fraud had destroyed our family in the way it used to exist. But maybe that version of our family needed to be destroyed. Maybe we'd been holding on to something toxic, calling it love because we didn't know better. And maybe, someday, we'd build something new. Something honest and real and based on actual respect rather than performance and manipulation. Or maybe we wouldn't. Maybe some things, once broken, stay broken. Either way, I'd be okay. Because I'd proven to myself that I could survive the worst kind of betrayal and come through it still intact. Still myself. Still capable of trust and hope and moving forward. The compass around my neck caught the fading light. North, south, east, west. Clear directions in an uncertain world. I'd found my way through the darkness, and now I was standing in the light of my own choices, bearing the weight of their consequences but no longer crushed by them. That was enough. That was everything. I took one last look at the city below, then turned and walked back to my car. Behind me was the past with all its complications. Ahead of me was the future, unwritten and full of possibility. And in between was this moment, this breath, this choice to keep going. Sometimes justice means prison time and shattered families and years of complicated feelings. Sometimes it means standing alone when you'd rather have company. Sometimes it means losing people you love because loving them has become impossible. But it also means this. This moment of clarity. This knowledge that you chose truth over comfort. This quiet certainty that you can trust yourself even when everyone else questions your judgment. I got in my car and drove home through the darkening streets of Portland, my grandmother's compass resting against my heart, pointing north toward whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.